that. I probably don't need this because I can talk quite loudly when I have to. Can you hear me at the back? Yeah, thank you. I need it. Okay, I'll shout into it. You need one old guy on the panel, don't you? Someone who's been around a bit and who knows a little bit of the background and the history. And I'm actually going to take a few steps back and a completely different slant on it. I loved Chris's presentation. It was really very articulate and very touching. It brings it back to the sort of the human scale. But today I'm really dressed, I should have dressed in black. I nearly did put a black shirt on because I'm representing, if you like, the view from the developers. I am not standing up here as a developer. I'm an independent, completely independent. But I also have the benefit of 20 years experience in the government. So I'm going to start off covering, with respect, Gracie, what you didn't. Because how did we get in the mess we're in today? I think we should ask ourselves that question. How did we get into the pickle that we've got into? And let me give you a little, give you my own thoughts and observations. First, as a civil servant on one side of the argument, and secondly, as a functionary of Sun Guy on the other side of the argument. And I'm going to talk initially about GIC facilities generically. Open space is part of GIC, Government Institute Community. But the whole discussion revolved around that. And you can actually trace it back to the late 70s, early 80s. And what happened then? There was the creation of the planning department. Up until then, we didn't really have a functioning planning unit. They were very much the Cinderella in the overall development process in Hong Kong. The engineers were driving it harder, the estate surveyors were driving it harder, the planners were a little bit in the back. But suddenly there were, quite correctly, it was time for us to grow up and bring planning more to the forefront. And what happened was it became part of the practice in the early 80s when you were submitting a Section 16 or a rezoning. The planners started twisting the developer's arm, saying if you want approval, planning game became the catchphrase. And you know, they'd ask you to put things in. And if you didn't put the things in, then it would be very hard for them to recommend to the town planning board that your scheme be approved. So this sort of coercion, encouragement, if you like, official, you know, so it's reverse bribery in a way, I think, in many ways. Now, this started to become the norm. If you didn't put this stuff in, you weren't going to get your plans approved at town planning board. So suddenly, it became part of the norm. Now, back in the 1980s, that was probably, I mean, we didn't have the same awareness, community awareness, and of implications of management. How do you run these things? But there's another aspect I'd like to touch on, and it's really important. And this, I put my government hat on now, my ex-government hat, because GIC facilities, and I use the word in the broadest sense, used to come in two, well, and I think they still do. They come in two different chunks. GIC facilities that are required in auction sites and tender sites are very clearly spelt out in the lease documents and are factored in to the way that the land premium is paid. Either it's silent and therefore the developer will reflect the cost of doing the GIC facilities, whatever they are, whether it's open space, whether it's a community hall or whatever. He can factor it into the premium that he bids or tenders, that's fine. Or there's a statement in the document that says if you do this amount of work, you will be reimbursed X million dollars. So it's covered one way or the other. Absolutely no problem. Not so for the GIC facilities that you had your arm twisted to do. When you do a lease modification or a land exchange and you've got these GIC facilities that came through the town planning board process, you get no premium deduction for it whatsoever. And what was happening was that the planners were circulating these proposals for comprehensive development, and people just jumped on the bandwagon. This created another critical problem, and it's something that we need to address very seriously. The two-tier approach inside government on funding. Very easy to get money, or relatively, sorry, relatively easy to get money for the one-off capital project up front. Not usually a problem. This is not a poor government. Don't believe a word Zhong Zhang ever tells you. They have got money so deep, they've got pockets so deep, they can do whatever they like. Huge, huge reserves, so don't buy that argument ever. Capital costs, because of the problem, not the problem, because of the inherited issues from the Land Commission, the 50 hectares and how the money from land sale revenue gets put in the Public Works programme. No problem there, huge reserves in the Capital Works Fund. So no problem at all getting money to build the project. Huge problems on recurring. Big, big issue. And this is what was happening. With those, going back to the issues I was articulating earlier, for those schemes that are built up properly, where the client department has a Public Works programme item, where they do all the design and everything, and it goes into the lease document very clearly with either a rebate on the premium or a reimbursement of costs. They have developed the argument for that particular project, and usually sufficiently to get the recurrent cost as well. Not so for the bandwagon people who just jumped on, for which the developer didn't get reimbursed, and which the client department at the end says, oh, I can't take back that old person's home, I haven't got the money to run it. So what do you end up with? A vacant piece of concrete. Complete nonsense. So these issues are still floating around, correct me if I'm wrong, but the correct allocation of money for the management and maintenance of open space, we can bring back the argument to open space, is really crucial to getting this whole public-private partnership working. It's absolutely vital. And I don't think it should be swept under the table. It's included somewhere in your reports there about funding. Capital costs, not a problem. Recurrent costs, problem. And I think you really need to focus on making sure that there's an adequate stream of money on the recurrent side to make sure that all the lovely... Look at Chris's lovely idea. I don't know whether it's on government land or not. Because the other issue that flowed out, when we're asked to do something in the private sector, you want to do things to a certain standard. The client department says, oh, that's too expensive. We can't afford the management costs of that. So we'd like you to build these horrible toilet tiles that are the minimum cost and easiest to maintain, rather than maybe a bit of marble or something that look really nice and attractive. So you've got a conflict there between the public and the private. Where should the standard be set? These are all issues that need, they're not easy. I mean, I can articulate them. Finding solutions is another matter. But this question of the strands of government expenditure and the controls is something that we shouldn't lose sight of. And I think I've said quite enough about it. I go on strongly. I mean, I think what should happen is that this idea of jumping on the bandwagon should be completely stopped. I think it's a very simple, clear message that's got to go out moving forward. What we've inherited, we have to accept, but with moving forward, if the client department cannot put his hand on his heart at the start of the process and say, I've got the money to take it,